Mr. Jan Vandemoortele, co-architect of the MDGs and senior manager at the UN, which are the four processes and institutions which will play an important role in creating change?
Beyond 2015, to have legitimacy, the MDGs will have to come from a forum like the UN, intergovernmental forum. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that it's only governments who have a say in the process. This time it should be much broader. Last time around it was purely intergovernmental, and then a few bureaucrats and experts like myself got in a room and we hammered the MDGs out. This time, hopefully, it will be much more inclusive and participatory. People from the world of business, people from the world of the media, people from the world of the civil society, all over, to take part, to suggest, to make recommendations, options. Hopefully this will happen between now and 2015. I think most people, the big majority of the people say, yes, we need something like that. There was recently this 100 Voices report that also indicates that from the South. Everybody agrees, of course. The details is the problem. How exactly will it have to look like? Here I want to highlight one major difference. When we put the MDGs together 10 years ago, we never had the ambition of formulating an agenda for international development. The purpose of putting the MDGs together was to rescue the Millennium Declaration from oblivion. Make sure that this declaration doesn't get lost in the dustbin of history, as so many times have happened with the Copenhagen Declaration, the summit, the social summit, the Cairo Declaration with population and development, etc. This was happening as well. That's why we put the MDGs together, to rescue the Millennium Declaration. 10 years later, we are now looking at MDGs with the eyes of an international agenda for development. So we are talking about two different things. So this time they will have to be very different, absolutely. The way environment is covered is not adequate in the MDGs. The way gender equality is covered is not adequate. So there's a lot of work to do, and that will only come from an inclusive process. It's not going to come from the experts or from the lobbies, from the special interest groups. It will have to come from a very broad assignment of people to take part in it.
What about the Rio +20 conference?
Of course, the MDGs is not only about environment. However important the environment is, and probably much more important today than 10 years ago with climate change, if we go for an international agreed development agenda, it has to be much more than environment. And so starting from a thematic issue of environment to a global one could have some consequences which are not going to lead to an equilibrium, an even-handed way of looking at social development, economic development, human development, and those things. So yes, hopefully it will work, but I think we need to have a separate process between now and 2015, specifically focused on the MDGs. Rio +20 can be a big stepping stone to that, but it's not going to be enough.
Does the UN have a central role to play?
The UN has to play the leadership. It cannot be a northern donor-centric agenda. It cannot be some loosely associated people from the south. It really has to be a global agenda, north-south. And that is the only place where it can be. It can also not come from the IMF or the World Bank. It's only the UN, and I wish personally to see the UN Secretariat take a stronger leadership in organizing all the key partners and the stakeholders to put that process. So far, what I read and hear and see is that the UN Secretariat is relying very much on the usual mechanisms of ECOSOC meetings, of General Assembly meetings, of Rio +20. And I'm not saying that this is not a relevant fora for that, but you need much more to that, because we only have 3 years, 3.5 years, and if you go for an inclusive participatory process, you need time.
What about the post-2015 development agenda? Will it be crucial in creating a new framework?
This is a bit of a false distinction, because of course, the focus is on 2015. We have to accelerate progress and get the most out of the current MDGs and catch up. We have a lot of catching up to do. But that doesn't preclude us from, at the same time, looking backwards, saying, why didn't we make more progress over the past 20 years? Why is it that there is this delay and this gap? And then, on the basis of that, start thinking about a new framework. The danger is that if we don't do that collectively as a global community, 2015 will come, there won't be much time to discuss the new framework, and the usual story then is that the donors will be ready with a version of how they see the next incarnation of the MDGs. Actually, this is already happening. The key donors, the usual suspects, the Dutch, the Brits and others, the Scandinavians, they are actively doing that thinking work. And that's good. That's good that they do the thinking work, but if they are the only ones doing it, then it's going to be a biased result, and it's going to be another donor-dominated, donor-centric agenda for beyond 2015. If we want it to be really balanced, north-south, government, non-government people, business people, media people, we have to start now.
You spoke about indicators early on. In your view, are indicators crucial in making an agenda real?
I have thought long and hard of how did the MDGs become so mobilizing, so important. Because 10 years ago, when we put this thing together, none of us had any idea that today we would be sitting here and discussing the MDGs. Because these acronyms come and go and they disappear very fast, very often. And this one is sticking. Why? I think the two elements why the MDGs are so mobilizing is, first of all, their conciseness. You can understand, anybody can understand it. They pass the proverbial grandmother test. Would my grandmother have understood it, so to speak? The second one is measurability. They can be measured. You're not talking about some fluffy, fuzzy agenda for development. No, you can measure it. Under 5 mortality rate is a good indicator. Underweight for children, school enrollment, all these are reasonably well based on indicators. And so when we think beyond 2015, personally, I say yes, the agenda has to change. It has to be a very different thing. Maybe we shouldn't even call it MDGs. That's why I talk personally about the post-MDG agenda, not the post-2015 agenda. I think we should go for something post-MDG. But those two characteristics cannot be tinkered with. The conciseness and the measurability are essential. So that's why indicators are key. And anybody who comes with a proposal to the table of saying, oh, next time around I want this to be included in the MDGs, the final test should be, is there a good indicator for that thing, and is there good global data to tell us how we are doing? If the answer to those things is not yes, don't include it, because then we will get into a very fuzzy, unmeasurable in the set of indicators, which are then open to subjectivity, subjective interpretation, and then they lose their value.
What about the criticism that indicators reduce an agenda into something very narrow?
There my response is that the human rights instruments predate the MDGs in most cases, if not in all cases. The MDGs are not essential to a human rights approach to development, because we had a human rights system already in place before we got the MDGs. And this is true for many other domains of development. The MDGs are not the be-all and end-all. It is a shorthand version of what we call development. And development is very complex. Human rights are essential. Environment is essential. Gender equality is essential, etc., etc. All these complex things. But once you want to reduce international development to something that grandmother understands, you need to simplify and you need to eliminate. But then the mistake many of us make is that, well, if my item is not in the MDGs, it kind of devalues my item or my topic. Wrong. No, the MDGs are just a screen, a kind of a package to make it look attractive and understandable, but the inside of the box remains very complex and very difficult to understand. I've been in this more than 30 years and I still have problems understanding it. Most of us, if we are honest with ourselves.
You spoke about the value of the MDGs for being clear, precise, concise, and being understandable. But what are the other lessons that you have learned along the way about the MDGs and their implementation?
One particular item that has been bothering me for the past several years is this interpretation of the MDGs as something that applies to all countries all the time. That next time we have to formulate that in a better way. For me, that was very evident. And it was so evident we didn't have to put the emphasis on it. But that was a mistake 10 years ago. And now when we say Malawi is missing the MDGs, I say, holy mackerel, the MDGs were not meant specifically for Malawi. They were meant for all of us together, collectively. They are collective global targets. You cannot use them. So that is one of the problems we have. We have to be careful that we don't repeat that this adaptation at the country level is an essential part of whatever this MDGs will be called beyond 2015, so that we don't abuse that. So there again, we have to be very careful that we don't use the MDGs as another set of conditionality. And we won't even be able, we won't even agree in this room, I guess, about whether you will use the MDGs as a positive sanction or as a negative sanction. If a country doesn't reach the MDGs, what does this mean? Does that country deserve more support? Or are we going to say that that country should get less of support from the outside? These are the essential questions of ethics and value that you have to get into. There's no clear-cut answer to that. So I would say no, the MDGs are meant to encourage everybody to go the extra mile and to, at the country level, to align the development agenda with a set of global targets where everybody agrees about.
What, in your view, are the important actors in a globalized, or even speaking about a post-globalized world, the emergence of the South? Who are the important actors in influencing and bringing about change?
Yeah, of course, the G7 has lost a bit of its power in the past 10 years, and now it's the BRICS and the emerging economies. But it would be a simplified view of the world and also of the ideal world that the BRICS can now replace a few of the G7 countries. The BRICS do not represent all the countries. That's why I come back to my first point, the UN. Because the UN is not about the G7 or the G20, it's about the G193. Because there's just a new one joined, South Sudan. So that is where the value lies, that this has to be truly as inclusive as possible. Of course, you cannot expect that South Sudan will have the same say as Brazil, for instance, or China, or whatever. But at least that everybody has a chance to raise their voice, to make their option known, the preference known, whatever, their objection known to something, and let that cook, but let it also simmer elsewhere in the world, not only in the UN at the at the General Assembly. Let it all converge at the General Assembly, but make sure that the General Assembly is aware of what civil society, the media people, some celebrities, this is the world of today, that all those views and suggestions get to the table. And that is why I have proposed that the UN should create what I call a peer and partner group of maybe half a dozen people, led by somebody from the South, ideally like a person like Lula, to for 3 years to consult wide and deep with the Secretariat, an independent commission, an independent panel, that they scout around and they come to you and to your members of the organization to say, how would you see the MDGs beyond 2015? What are your suggestions? And that they collect that all, they aggregate it in some proposals and options, and then they put that to the table of the GA for political debate among member states. That would be for me the ideal, but that has to happen this year, because then they will have 2012, 2013, 2014 to do that consultation. That takes time, and in 2015 they can then table their option and proposals, and then the member states can then pick up the political debate from there. And I'm not seeing any movement from the Secretariat in New York to go in that direction, to have this independent panel. Too much is being relied on the current existing meetings of ECOSOC and the GA, and that's not where it will come from.
You spoke about targeting poor people, about eradicating poverty, but if we are speaking about the challenges of climate change and resource constraint, we are also looking at the global middle class, the consuming class. How do you think they should be involved in the conversation?
I hope so, and there again something like the MDGs can be very useful to explain to a non-specialized audience that my behavior here where I live has implications for the standard of living of somebody thousands and thousands of miles away, who live in a very different climate, in a very different continent, that we make that connections. And that is where the MDGs play a role. We don't need to go any further in exactly explaining. That happens elsewhere. That's why we have Rio +20, that's why we have UNEP, that's why we have other mechanisms to deal with the environment. But to explain to people in Belgium, where we are now, that the way we behave, the way we drive, the way we consume and waste energy has implications for people in the Sahel and in Asia and in Latin America. That is the concept, and then the eyes of some people will open and say, that is my contribution to poverty reduction.
And what role does CIDSE, as a Catholic development organization with constituencies in Catholic communities, what role do we have to play in this?
That is where the MDGs have to bubble up from much more. It's not only ministers who go to the General Assembly, heads of state who go there, or first secretaries in the embassies who are in New York to define the global agenda. It is the people, it is us. And CIDSE, as a community-based organization, has an important role to play to make sure that it bubbles up and it gets aggregated at the global level in something meaningful. And the challenge for CIDSE is to break through that glass ceiling, because you are very well established at the ground, but how do you make the voice heard from the local level to the global fora in New York? That's a very difficult thing. And that's where I'm saying we need some independent commission who comes to CIDSE, and Lula comes to CIDSE and says, hi, how do you think the MDG should look like beyond 2015? And then you put your experience on the table. And then Lula goes with that, picks a few things out and puts it on the table in New York.
What, in your view, can CIDSE do to break this glass ceiling?
There are various issues. I'm coming back to the 100 Voices report. A very simple, short, easy to read report. It didn't take a lot of time. It didn't cost a lot of money. Those little initiatives. Don't go for one big thing and don't wait until you get it perfect. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Make sure that ideas that pop up left and right from where the people are on the ground get visibility. And bring that out in little reports, in blogs, in newspaper interviews, in TV interviews, in whatever fora, but throw them up. Throw them up as you have them in different forms. Don't wait until you get it all perfect and you get a very nice shiny report, a big one, that nobody reads. Get your half a page blog out, get your interview out, and I'm referring to 100 Voices, which was a very easy exercise, quickly done, and look at the impact it had. There's a clear message there, it's credible, and people say, they refer to it and they say, look, this is the voice of the South that we seldom hear, especially not in the donor countries. So that is my message to you. Don't wait until 2015, start now, and come up for a very participatory process between now and 2015 and start making concrete suggestions, even if you're not being asked. Throw it out and then you will see what happens.